Some people think dignity belongs to those who can afford it. They're wrong. The truest measure of a place is how it treats the tired stranger standing quietly at its door. Just before midnight, Ethan Walker stepped through the revolving doors of the Ashbourne Grand with his 8-year-old daughter asleep on his shoulder. Lily's small hand still clutched a faded stuffed rabbit she had carried everywhere since her mother passed away 3 years earlier. Ethan's gray hoodie was damp from the cool spring rain, and his worn blue jeans looked out of place beneath the glow of crystal chandeliers reflecting across polished marble floors. He carried no expensive luggage, wore no luxury watch, and made no effort to look important. He only looked like a father who had been traveling too long and wanted his little girl to sleep in a real bed before driving the remaining 40 miles home. The lobby was quiet except for soft piano music drifting through hidden speakers and the gentle clicking of computer keys behind the front desk. Ethan smiled politely as he approached the young clerk standing beneath the hotel's brass logo. "Good evening," he said softly, careful not to wake Lily. "I'd like one room for tonight, please." The clerk glanced up for barely a second before his eyes traveled from Ethan's faded sneakers to the sleeping child resting on his shoulder. Something subtle changed in his expression. It wasn't anger. It wasn't even open disrespect. It was a silent decision made before another word had been spoken. His fingers tapped the keyboard without much interest before he looked back up. "I'm sorry, sir," he said with practiced politeness. "We're completely booked tonight." Ethan nodded once. "Could you check one more time?" "Any room is fine." The clerk barely touched the keyboard again. "Nothing available." Ethan thanked him anyway and gently shifted Lily's weight on his shoulder. Before he could turn away, the revolving door opened behind him. A sharply dressed couple entered laughing, designer bags hanging from their shoulders. The clerk's posture immediately brightened. "Welcome to the Ashbourne Grand," he said warmly. "Checking in." The man smiled. "Actually, we forgot to make a reservation." "No problem at all," the clerk replied with an easy grin. "We still have several premium rooms available." Ethan remained perfectly still. He didn't interrupt. He didn't complain. He simply listened as 2 key cards slid across the polished counter only seconds after he had been told there were no rooms left. Lily slowly lifted her head from her father's shoulder, rubbing one sleepy eye. She watched the smiling couple walk toward the elevators before looking back at the clerk. Then she tugged gently on Ethan's sleeve and asked in a quiet voice that somehow carried through the silent lobby, "Daddy, if there were rooms for them, why wasn't there one for us?" Every conversation nearby seemed to disappear at once. Even the piano music suddenly felt distant. Ethan looked down at his daughter, forcing a reassuring smile despite the ache settling quietly inside his chest. He brushed a loose strand of blonde hair away from her face and whispered, "Sometimes people make mistakes, sweetheart." Lily looked back toward the front desk, her innocent eyes filled not with anger but confusion. "Then maybe somebody should help them fix it." Ethan gently lowered Lily from his shoulder so she could stand beside him, her small hand slipping naturally into his. The warmth of her fingers reminded him that no matter how uncomfortable the moment became, she was watching every choice he made. Children rarely remembered every word their parents spoke, but they never forgot how those parents treated other people when life became unfair. Ethan looked back at the front desk with the same calm expression. "I would appreciate it if you could check the reservation system one more time," he said quietly. "My daughter is exhausted, and we only need a room until morning." The clerk exhaled through his nose, clearly irritated that the conversation had not ended. He tapped the keyboard with exaggerated motions before turning the monitor slightly away, making certain Ethan could not see the screen. "Sir, I already told you, there are no rooms available." His voice remained polite enough that no one could accuse him of raising it, yet every syllable carried the unmistakable message that this discussion was over. Ethan simply nodded. "Then I would like to speak with the manager on duty." A security supervisor glanced toward the front desk after noticing the conversation growing louder around the reception area. Ethan offered him a calm nod. "We are not causing any trouble. I only asked for someone who could answer a simple question." The supervisor studied Ethan for a moment, then quietly stepped back. The clerk hesitated for only a second before reaching for the phone. Of course. His tone suggested he expected the request to solve nothing. A minute later, a woman in her early 40s emerged from a hallway behind the reception area. Her navy blazer was perfectly pressed. Her silver name tag read Claudia Pierce, and her practiced smile looked as though it had been rehearsed thousands of times. "Good evening," she said. "I understand there is a concern." Ethan extended his hand politely. "My name is Ethan Walker. I believe there has been a misunderstanding. I was informed the hotel is completely full, but moments later another couple received a room without a reservation." Claudia did not shake his hand. Instead, she folded both of hers neatly in front of her. "Our staff follows established procedures," she replied. "Certain accommodations become available depending on guest needs." Ethan listened without interrupting. "Then perhaps one of those accommodations could help my daughter." Claudia glanced briefly toward Lily before returning her attention to Ethan. "Unfortunately, tonight we must prioritize guests whose reservations align with our hospitality standards." The sentence sounded professional, but something inside it felt cold. Ethan recognized it immediately. He had heard similar phrases years earlier in boardrooms where complicated language often hid simple prejudice. Lily looked up at the manager with honest curiosity. "What are hospitality standards?" Claudia forced another smile. "It means we try to make sure every guest has the best experience possible." Lily considered the answer carefully. "Does that mean we are not guests?" The question lingered in the quiet lobby. Near the concierge desk, a young employee arranging welcome folders paused without realizing she had stopped working. Her name tag read Maya Collins. She had watched the entire exchange from the moment Ethan entered. She had also seen the reservation screen a few minutes earlier. One deluxe king suite had become available only 6 minutes earlier after a last-minute cancellation. Maya had refreshed the reservation system twice since then. The room was still there. She knew it. The clerk knew it. Claudia almost certainly knew it too. Maya's eyes met Ethan's for only a heartbeat before dropping toward the polished floor. She wanted to speak, but years of learning when to stay silent held her in place. Ethan noticed her hesitation without exposing her. He simply looked back at Claudia and said, "I am not asking for special treatment. I am only asking to be treated the same as the people who walked through that door after we did." For the first time that evening, Claudia's smile disappeared completely. The silence settled over the lobby with a weight that no one seemed willing to disturb. Guests who had been checking messages or chatting quietly now glanced toward the front desk, sensing that something far more important than a reservation was unfolding. Ethan did not raise his voice. He had learned years ago that calm often revealed more truth than anger ever could. Lily stood close beside him, hugging her faded stuffed rabbit against her chest while studying the adults around her with the simple honesty only a child possessed. Maya remained behind the concierge desk, her heart beating faster with every passing second. She had joined the Ashbourne Grand because she believed hospitality meant offering comfort to strangers. Her grandmother had once told her that a hotel should feel like a lighthouse for tired travelers. Tonight, that lighthouse suddenly felt dim. She glanced once more at the reservation screen glowing softly beside her. Deluxe King Suite. Available. The green status indicator had not changed. The room was still empty. She swallowed hard and looked toward Claudia, who caught the movement immediately. The manager's expression remained perfectly composed, but the brief shake of her head carried a message that required no words. "Stay quiet." Maya lowered her eyes again. Lily noticed the exchange. Children often saw what adults tried to hide. She walked a few careful steps toward the concierge desk and smiled gently at Maya. "Are you sad?" she asked. Maya blinked in surprise. "Why would you ask that?" Lily shrugged softly. "Because you look like you want to help somebody, but you cannot." The young employee felt her throat tighten. Before she could answer, Claudia stepped forward. "Sweetheart, sometimes grown-ups have rules they must follow." Lily nodded politely. "My mommy used to say rules should help people." She paused before asking, "Do rules ever forget people?" No one answered. Ethan rested a reassuring hand on his daughter's shoulder. Lily, let us not make this harder for anyone. She looked up at him. But you always tell me that being kind is never supposed to make life harder. Ethan smiled faintly. That is still true. Across the lobby, an elderly couple who had been waiting for the elevator exchanged quiet glances. The husband slowly removed his reading glasses while his wife continued watching the scene with growing concern. Even the doorman near the entrance shifted uncomfortably, pretending to straighten a luggage cart while listening to every word. The atmosphere had changed. This was no longer about a room. It had become a question of character. Ethan reached into the inside pocket of his jacket and removed a worn leather wallet. Instead of pulling out a credit card, he carefully unfolded a small photograph. For only a moment he looked at it before slipping it back into place. Lily recognized the picture immediately. It was the last family photograph taken before her mother became ill. She gently squeezed her father's hand. "I miss her too," she whispered. Ethan nodded without speaking. Claudia noticed the quiet exchange but dismissed it as another attempt to gain sympathy. "Sir," she said firmly, "if there is nothing further, I must ask that you allow us to continue assisting our other guests." Ethan met her eyes with steady calm. "There is one more thing," he replied. "I would like to understand why this hotel no longer seems to remember the promise it was built to keep." Instead of walking toward the exit, Ethan quietly turned toward the east corridor where the Founder Gallery had stood since the hotel first opened. He had not wandered there by accident. Without another word, Ethan took Lily's hand and stepped away from the front desk. He did not storm out, argue, or demand attention. Instead, he walked slowly across the lobby as though searching for something only he remembered. Lily followed beside him, her sneakers making soft taps across the polished marble floor, while her stuffed rabbit rested under one arm. Several guests quietly watched them pass, unsure why the father who had just been refused a room carried himself with such unusual calm. Near the grand staircase stood a long hallway lined with framed photographs and bronze plaques celebrating the hotel's history. Most visitors hurried past without giving them a second glance, but Ethan slowed the moment he reached the display. His eyes moved carefully from one frame to the next, as though reading old memories instead of names. Lily noticed the change in her father's expression immediately. The sadness that had been resting quietly behind his smile became something deeper, something familiar. She squeezed his hand. "Daddy?" she whispered. "Are you all right?" Ethan nodded gently. "I just have not been here in a very long time." Across the lobby, Maya watched them from behind the concierge desk. Curiosity overcame her hesitation. She had worked at the Ashbourne Grand for almost 2 years, yet she had never seen anyone study the Founder Gallery with such personal attention. Even Claudia glanced toward the hallway, wondering why the man had not simply left. Lily wandered a few feet ahead until one bronze plaque caught her attention. It hung beneath a beautifully framed photograph of the hotel during its grand opening years earlier. Unlike the other displays honoring architects and investors, this plaque carried only one sentence beneath a woman's name: Grace Walker. "Hospitality is a promise, never a privilege." Lily stopped walking. She stared at the name, then at the photograph above it. The woman in the picture wore a warm smile and stood beside a young man whose face looked strikingly familiar despite the years between then and now. Lily slowly turned toward Ethan, her blue eyes growing wider with every heartbeat. "Daddy," she said softly. Ethan looked up and immediately understood what she had found. For a brief moment, he simply stood there, unable to speak. The entire lobby seemed to fall into complete silence. Lily pointed toward the plaque with one trembling finger. "Why is Mommy's name on the wall?" The question drifted through the marble hall so gently that no one could pretend not to hear it. Maya's eyes widened. Claudia frowned, confused by the unexpected connection. Even the front desk clerk turned away from his computer to look at the display he had passed every day without truly reading it. Ethan walked slowly to his daughter and knelt beside her. He brushed a thin layer of dust from the edge of the bronze plaque with his fingertips before offering a quiet smile. "Because your mother believed every tired traveler deserved kindness before they deserved anything else." Lily looked back at the photograph. Did she help build this place? Ethan hesitated, then answered honestly. She helped build its heart. Behind them, Claudia finally approached, her confident footsteps echoing across the polished floor. She glanced at the plaque, then at Ethan, trying to understand why a stranger spoke about Grace Walker as though remembering someone he loved. Before she could ask another question, Ethan rose calmly to his feet, keeping one hand protectively on Lily's shoulder. His voice remained gentle, but every word carried the quiet certainty of someone who had come searching for truth rather than comfort. "The building is still beautiful," he said while looking around the magnificent lobby. "Now I need to find out whether the promise carved into that wall is still alive." Claudia studied Ethan for several long seconds, searching his face for an explanation that refused to appear. The confidence she had carried only moments earlier was beginning to crack beneath a growing uncertainty she could not name. "How do you know Grace Walker?" she asked carefully. Ethan looked once more at the bronze plaque before answering. "I knew her better than anyone." His voice remained steady, carrying neither pride nor accusation. It was simply the truth. Lily rested her head gently against her father's arm. "She was my mommy," she said with innocent certainty. The words seemed to echo across the quiet lobby. Maya covered her mouth instinctively. The elderly couple near the elevator exchanged another surprised glance. Even the front desk clerk shifted uneasily behind his computer, suddenly aware that the evening had become something far different from an ordinary check-in. Claudia forced herself to remain composed. "Sir, I understand this may be emotional, but the Founder Gallery contains many people connected to the history of this hotel." Ethan nodded politely. "I know. I helped choose where every plaque would hang." Claudia frowned. "That is impossible." Ethan reached into his jacket pocket once more, but instead of producing identification, he removed a simple silver key attached to a worn leather keychain. The number engraved into the metal had faded with time. Lily smiled as soon as she saw it. "You still keep Mommy's lucky key." Ethan gently turned the old key between his fingers. "She carried it the day this hotel first opened." Claudia stared at the object without understanding its significance. "Sir, if you are trying to prove something, I will need documentation." Ethan slipped the key back into his pocket. "You will have it soon enough." He calmly removed his cell phone and scrolled through a short list of contacts. There was no dramatic pause, no angry expression, and no attempt to impress the people standing nearby. He simply pressed one name and lifted the phone to his ear. "Daniel," he said after the call connected. "I am in the main lobby. Would you please bring the closing documents and the ownership file downstairs?" There was a brief pause before Ethan answered, "Yes, right now." He ended the call and placed the phone back into his pocket. Claudia folded her arms. "Closing documents?" Ethan met her eyes. 3 weeks ago, the ownership transfer for this property became official. The acquisition had been completed through Walker Legacy Holdings, a private holding company. Until the official announcement, even most employees had never seen or met the new owner. She gave a short, skeptical laugh. "This hotel belongs to Ashbourne Hospitality Group." "It did," Ethan replied. "The transaction was completed through Walker Legacy Holdings." Maya's eyes widened as the name settled into her memory. During employee orientation months earlier, someone had briefly mentioned that the property had recently been acquired through a private investment company, but the new principal owner had chosen to remain anonymous until a later announcement. No photographs had ever been released. No executive visits had been scheduled. Everything had remained confidential. Her gaze slowly returned to Ethan. Suddenly his calm no longer looked unusual. It looked familiar, like someone who had nothing left to prove. Claudia still refused to believe it. "If what you are saying is true," she replied, "why would the owner arrive dressed like this and ask for a room?" Ethan looked around the magnificent lobby one more time before answering. "Because buildings do not reveal their character during inspections. They reveal it when no one believes the owner is watching." The silence that followed felt heavier than anything spoken that evening. Somewhere beyond the lobby doors, the rain continued falling softly against the glass, While inside, every person waiting quietly began wondering whether the stranger they had overlooked had actually been seeing them all along. No one moved. The lobby, which only minutes earlier had echoed with quiet conversations and rolling suitcases, now felt suspended in time. Claudia opened her mouth to respond, but no words came. She had spent years believing confidence could solve almost any situation. Tonight, certainty had quietly slipped away. The front desk clerk stared at Ethan with growing disbelief, replaying every sentence he had spoken since the father first walked through the revolving doors. Each polite request, each calm reply, each moment of patience now felt painfully different. Lily looked up at her father with the peaceful trust that only a child could give. She did not understand business transactions or ownership documents. She only knew that her father never lied. She gently tugged on his sleeve. "Daddy, are we in trouble?" Ethan knelt beside her and smiled warmly. "No, sweetheart. Sometimes the truth simply takes a little longer to arrive than people expect." Maya felt tears beginning to gather in her eyes. She remembered her first day working at the hotel when the training instructor had spoken about the property's founding values. Hospitality begins before paperwork. Respect comes before payment. Every guest deserves to feel welcome. Those words had inspired her to accept the job. Somewhere along the way, those words had become framed decorations instead of daily practice. She looked toward Claudia, then back at Ethan, knowing silence no longer felt honorable. Before she could gather enough courage to speak, the elevator doors opened. A man in his late 50s stepped into the lobby carrying a dark leather briefcase. His charcoal suit was simple, his posture relaxed, and his pace unhurried. He scanned the room until his eyes found Ethan. Without hesitation, he walked directly toward him. "Good evening, Mr. Walker," he said respectfully. "I came as quickly as I could." Ethan offered a grateful nod. "Thank you, Daniel." The attorney placed the briefcase gently on a nearby table and opened 2 polished brass locks. Inside rested several neatly organized folders bearing legal seals and property records. Daniel removed a blue binder and handed it to Ethan before turning toward Claudia. "My name is Daniel Reeves. I represent Walker Legacy Holdings." Claudia accepted the binder with uncertain hands. The first page displayed the completed acquisition agreement. The following pages listed ownership transfers, signatures, state filings, and the effective closing date from 3 weeks earlier. Every document carried official certification. Every page confirmed exactly what Ethan had calmly said. Her eyes moved back and forth across the papers as the color slowly faded from her face. The front desk clerk leaned forward, trying to glimpse the documents from behind the counter. Maya quietly covered her mouth again, overwhelmed by the realization that the anonymous owner everyone had speculated about had been standing in front of them all evening, holding his daughter's hand. Daniel closed the briefcase and spoke with professional calm. Mr. Walker requested that no announcement be made until he had personally visited the property as an ordinary guest. Claudia looked up, struggling to understand. "Why?" she whispered. Ethan answered before Daniel could. "Because inspections measure buildings. Ordinary evenings measure character." No one argued. No one searched for another explanation. Even the rain outside seemed quieter against the tall glass windows. Lily looked around the silent lobby, then back at her father with a puzzled smile. "Daddy?" she asked softly. "Does this mean everybody can tell the truth now?" Ethan looked first at Maya, then at Claudia, then at every employee standing silently nearby. His answer was gentle enough for Lily, but powerful enough for every adult listening. They always could. Sometimes people only remember that after they have been given another chance. The lobby remained silent long after the documents had been closed. Nobody seemed interested in checking in anymore. Nobody looked at the marble floors or the crystal chandeliers. Every eye rested on Ethan, not because he had revealed power, but because he had carried himself with the same quiet dignity before anyone knew who he was. Daniel gently returned the papers to his briefcase before looking toward the front desk. "Mr. Walker," he asked, "would you like me to notify corporate security and the executive board?" Ethan slowly shook his head. Not yet. Daniel understood immediately. He had represented Ethan for nearly a decade and knew that rushing toward punishment had never been his way. Ethan believed that people deserved the opportunity to tell the truth before someone else exposed it for them. He turned toward the front desk clerk first. "What is your name?" The young man swallowed hard. "Trevor, sir." Ethan nodded. "Trevor, when I asked for a room, did you know one was available?" Trevor looked down at the polished counter. His fingers trembled slightly against the keyboard. For several long seconds he searched for an explanation that no longer existed. Finally he whispered, "Yes." Ethan did not react. "Why did you tell me the hotel was full?" Trevor closed his eyes for a moment. "Because I assumed you were not the kind of guest we were supposed to prioritize." The confession landed heavily across the lobby. Ethan remained calm. "Who taught you that?" Trevor hesitated before looking toward Claudia. She lowered her eyes. "Nobody said those exact words," Trevor admitted. "But I watched who received upgrades. I watched who was welcomed first. After a while, I thought I understood what mattered." Ethan nodded thoughtfully instead of angrily. Then he looked toward Maya. "Miss Collins." She stepped forward immediately. "Yes, sir." "When Lily asked if there was a room available, what did you know?" Maya took a slow breath. "I knew there was one deluxe suite left after a cancellation." Her voice became unsteady. "I wanted to say something. I should have said something." Ethan asked gently, "Why did you remain silent?" Tears formed in her eyes. "Because I was afraid of losing my job." Lily quietly walked over and slipped her small hand into Maya's. The young concierge looked down in surprise. "My teacher says being brave does not mean you are never scared," Lily said softly. "It means you tell the truth even when you are." Maya could not stop the tears now. She knelt to Lily's height. "You are right," she whispered. Ethan watched the exchange with quiet gratitude. Then he faced Claudia. She stood perfectly still, the confidence she had carried all evening replaced by honest regret. "Is there anything you would like to tell me?" Ethan asked. Claudia answered without excuses. "Yes, I forgot that policies exist to serve people, not to judge them. Somewhere along the way I stopped seeing guests and started seeing appearances." Ethan looked around the lobby once more. The elderly couple near the elevator nodded silently. Even several employees who had quietly gathered nearby lowered their heads. The lesson no longer belonged only to one manager or one clerk. It belonged to everyone standing in the room. Ethan finally spoke in the same calm voice that had never changed from the moment he entered the hotel. "Buildings can be renovated in a few months. A reputation can take years. But character begins changing the moment someone chooses honesty." For the first time that evening, no one in the lobby felt the need to defend themselves. They simply listened. The quiet that filled the lobby no longer felt uncomfortable. Felt honest. Ethan looked from one employee to the next before resting his eyes on Daniel. "Please make a note," he said calmly. "Tonight is not about embarrassment. It is about rebuilding trust." Daniel opened a small notebook and nodded. Trevor stood motionless behind the front desk, unable to hide the regret on his face. "Mr. Walker," he said softly, "I know an apology cannot erase what happened." Ethan answered with gentle sincerity. "No, it cannot. But a sincere apology can become the first brick in something better." Trevor lowered his head. "Then I am truly sorry. I judged you before I ever welcomed you." Ethan accepted the words with a quiet nod. "Thank you for telling the truth." He then turned toward Claudia. "Effective immediately, you are relieved of your management responsibilities while an independent review is completed. During that time, you will participate in every guest service training session as a learner, not as an instructor." Claudia blinked, surprised by the decision. She had expected anger. She had expected humiliation. Instead, she had been given accountability without cruelty. "I understand," she replied quietly, "and I accept it." Ethan continued, "Whether you remain with this company will depend on whether you can rediscover why you entered hospitality in the first place." Claudia slowly nodded. "I would like that opportunity." Ethan then faced Trevor once more. You will also be placed on administrative leave while the review is conducted. If you choose to return one day, you will begin again from the foundation, learning that every guest deserves the same welcome regardless of appearance. Trevor's eyes filled with gratitude despite the difficult consequences. Thank you for giving me that chance. Ethan smiled faintly. People learn very little when they believe they are beyond redemption. Finally, he turned toward Maya. She immediately straightened her posture, uncertain what would come next. Miss Collins, Ethan said, you remained silent because you were afraid. Fear is understandable, but silence can still wound people. Tonight you found the courage to speak honestly. That matters. Maya nodded through quiet tears. I will never stay silent again when kindness is needed. Ethan extended his hand toward her. Beginning tomorrow, I would like you to help redesign our employee orientation program. Every new team member should hear not only our policies but also the reasons behind them. Maya looked stunned. Me? Ethan smiled. The best teachers are often the people who remember what it feels like to be afraid. Around the lobby, several employees exchanged hopeful glances. The atmosphere that had been filled with tension only minutes earlier slowly became lighter. The elderly couple near the elevator quietly applauded once, not loudly enough to celebrate anyone's mistake, but gently enough to honor the lesson they had witnessed. Lily looked up at her father with a proud smile. Daddy, does this mean the hotel is going to be nicer now? Ethan knelt beside her and brushed a strand of hair behind her ear. That depends on the people inside it, sweetheart. Beautiful buildings are easy to build. Kind hearts take practice every single day. Lily looked around at the employees who were listening carefully. She smiled at them with complete innocence. Then we can all practice together. Soft laughter spread across the lobby, breaking the last traces of tension. For the first time that evening, the room felt exactly as Grace Walker had once imagined it should feel. Not because everything had been perfect, but because everyone had finally chosen honesty over pride. The following morning, sunlight poured through the towering windows of the Ashbourne Grand, washing the marble lobby with a warmth that felt entirely different from the night before. The building had not changed. The chandeliers were the same. The polished floors reflected the same golden light. Yet something invisible had shifted. Employees greeted each guest with genuine smiles instead of practiced ones. Doors were opened before anyone asked. Questions were answered before frustration could appear. Hospitality had become personal again. Ethan walked through the lobby holding Lily's hand, not as an owner inspecting a business, but as a father honoring a promise. Daniel stood nearby reviewing renovation schedules, while Maya welcomed an elderly couple with such kindness that they thanked her twice before reaching the elevators. Ethan smiled quietly. This was the beginning Grace had always hoped for. Near the founder gallery, a maintenance employee carefully installed a new bronze plaque beneath Grace Walker's photograph. The words were simple, yet every person who entered the building would see them before reaching the front desk. No guest earns dignity. Every guest arrives with it. Several employees paused to read the inscription. Trevor, now preparing to begin additional training after accepting responsibility for his actions, stood silently before the plaque longer than anyone else. He removed his employee badge for a moment, held it in both hands, and whispered to himself, I will be worthy of wearing this again. Across the lobby, Claudia approached Ethan. She no longer wore a manager's jacket. Instead, she carried a notebook filled with pages of handwritten reflections from the overnight training she had already begun. Mr. Walker, she said sincerely, I spent years believing leadership meant making decisions. I forgot it also meant setting an example. Ethan accepted the notebook but did not open it. People remember how you make them feel long after they forget your title, he replied. Claudia nodded. I finally understand that. Lily wandered back to her mother's photograph and smiled up at it. Hi, Mommy, she whispered. Everybody is being nicer today. Ethan heard the words and felt an old ache soften into gratitude. He walked beside his daughter and rested his hand gently on the frame. She would have liked that, he said. Lily looked at him with thoughtful eyes. Do you think Mommy knew people would forget? Ethan smiled gently. Maybe. That is why she wrote reminders instead of rules. Lily considered that answer before slipping her small hand into his once more. Then we should keep reminding people. Ethan laughed softly. Yes, sweetheart. We should. As they turned toward the entrance, every employee in the lobby naturally paused to wish them a good morning. No one had been instructed to do it. No announcement had been made. Respect had simply become part of the room again. Outside, the rain from the previous night had disappeared, leaving behind clear skies and fresh air. Ethan looked back one final time at the hotel Grace had helped shape with compassion rather than wealth. He realized the greatest renovation had never been about the building itself. It had been about the hearts inside it. Lily squeezed his hand and smiled. Daddy. Yes. I think Mommy would call this home now. Ethan looked at the open doors, the welcoming faces, and the words carved forever beneath Grace's photograph. Then he smiled with quiet peace and answered, I think she already has.